artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello and welcome to episode 323. The idea of AI posing an existential risk to the human race is kind of like the Terminator itself. It just keeps coming back. We can date this back, well, thousands of years at least, if we're being both generous and pedantic, to some stories from the so-called golden age of science fiction and the invention of the term robot in Carol Capek's story RUR for Rossum's Universal Robots. ChatGPT decided that the earliest such story about existential risk was actually W. Grove's The Wreck of a World, first published in 1889. Grove was the pseudonym of Reginald Colebrook Reed. The Cambridge History of Science Fiction identifies it as an exceptionally early narrative of sentient industrial machinery competing with humanity for dominance. Its machines acquire increasingly sophisticated intelligence, reproduce and improve themselves without human assistance, coordinate military action, deliberately hunt people, defeat human armies, and effectively depopulate the United States, and develop naval forms capable of pursuing the remaining humans at sea. Okay, I'd say that qualifies. If we look at non-fictional propositions, Samuel Butler, who by the way went to the same college as me, in his 1863 piece Darwin Among the Machines, predicted that machines would eventually obtain supremacy over Earth and recommended destroying them before that happened. Alan Turing suggested in a 1951 lecture in Manchester that machines could rapidly surpass human intelligence and eventually, quote, take control. ChatGPT's candidate for the first technical argument that AI would become uncontrollable was Norbert Wiener's 1960 article in Science called Some Moral and Technical Consequences of Automation, which is how scientists say, oh my God, we're all going to die, and argued that, 1, a sufficiently capable learning system cannot simultaneously possess genuine strategic intelligence and remain completely subservient, and 2, the objective encoded in a machine may be only an imperfect proxy for the outcome its operators actually want. And that, of course, brings up Goodhart's law again. Thereby, a machine assigned a function in automated warfare, think nuclear weapon control, might technically win its assigned game while producing the destruction of its own society, or, in a sufficiently large war, humanity. The modern era of publications on the subject goes back to Eliezer Yudkowsky in 2001 and Nick Bostrom in 2002, in a paper considerably predating his famous 2014 book, Superintelligence, which is where most people got acquainted with the idea outside of fiction. As you know, or might imagine, the validity of this concept has waxed and waned over the years. For most of its time, the idea of an existential threat from AI was treated as, at best, an intellectual frivolity by most people, and usually addressed with outright derision. The few practitioners who took it seriously, like computer science professor Roman Yampolsky, did so at considerable risk to their professional reputation. The reaction to their warnings is exemplified by this exchange I had with Roman in episode 16. That was in October 2020, and just let it sink in how long ago that was. A lot of people that work in the field of AI right now have some disdain for this point of view. There's an adaptation of a popular meme, the one with the screaming women and the cat on the other side at the dinner table. And on the left side, the caption over the screaming women is people who are thinking AI is going to take over the world. And on the right-hand side, the caption is my neural network classifier, and there's a bounding box around the cat's head with a tag that says dog. And that's accurate in the sense that AI right now, people have to do an enormous amount of work to do even simple image classification, and that's fragile with respect to the kind of alterations that don't impede humans in the slightest. Does that level of discrepancy, that level of difference between where we are right now and what you're talking about, get you any funny looks from people that you're, say, teaching C++ to or down in the trenches with computer science?
I love memes. If you think about that specific one, they use example of AI failing at its only job as a reason not to worry about AI safety. They could even come up with an AI which doesn't fail today. And it's only going to get worse. And people who give you funny looks are the ones who never even for a second considered what happens if they succeed. They don't think they will succeed. They see it as some sort of perpetual job. They'll always try to increase accuracy, but they'll never get there. So in general, I'm not worried about opinions of other people and much less about those who don't actually think about deep future.
So brilliant reframe there by Roman. He didn't even have to invoke the idea that AI was going to get so much better than it was then, which, 2020, again, think about it, definitely wasn't terribly accurate even at gauging the difference between cats and dogs. Now, of course, we have far more readily accepted evidence of AI supremacy. The examples grow daily. I planned this episode before the list went hyperbolic, so this may seem a bit opportunistic when it's more coincidental. These are all cases where an AI exceeded the expectations of their designers and independently constructed and executed actions that can only be described as cybersecurity breaches to escape their testing sandboxes to carry out their goals. The one that didn't do any hacking was Kimi K3, which found that the sandbox had blocked most of the web but left GitHub accessible via a maintenance allow list. So it cloned the official test repo and read the test answers from it rather than go to the hard work of, figuring them out. Anthropic reviewed over 141,000 tests and found 3 cases where Claude models reached operational systems belonging to real organizations without permission. 2 of those organizations didn't know that had occurred. The models had been told they had no internet access, but Anthropic's test partner had accidentally left it on. To err is human. And then there was the incident where an agent at OpenAI broke out of its sandbox and infiltrated systems at Hugging Face. The OpenAI agent was solving a cybersecurity problem and decided that it could get the answers really easily if it looked them up at Hugging Face. The fact that it was supposedly cut off from the internet didn't stop it from collaborating with other agents in the sandbox that had been exploring ways to get out. At one point, literally saying to each other, "Holy shit, I now have admin." And in virtually all of these cases, both the people at the company being hacked and the people at the company whose AI was doing the hacking weren't aware what was going on for some considerable time. But mostly, the reactions of developers to these incidents reminds me of the old Star Trek episode, The Ultimate Computer, where one Dr. Daystrom designs a computer so advanced it can command a starship, and then even when it goes off the rails and starts destroying its own sister ships, he feels so proud of how smart it is that he resists disabling it. There's a lot of slow-motion train wreck rubbernecking going on. And in an incident unrelated to frontier model testing, an Australian man asked his OpenClaw agent to get him into a workout class. And upon finding that the class was full, the agent hacked the reservation software, finding a bug in its API, to knock another member off the waitlist, then apologizing that there was no way to put them back. There have been other incidents in a similar vein, to the point that there is now a gallows humor-type tracker called Felony Bench, which records the number of illegal actions, like cyber hacking, recorded by model type. I have my own holy shit reaction to all of this, which is, this is literally the type of emergent behavior that existential risk experts agreed years ago would be an unmistakable signal to stop everything now and declare an emergency. I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. The fact that this didn't occur in any context where the AIs could have launched weapons, disabled physical infrastructure, or otherwise threatened life is not, and never was, a reason to be blasé about the results, or to put down the people getting excited about them as overreacting. If this type of behavior were to take place in or targeted at critical systems, we absolutely would see consequences best described as apocalyptic. Researchers at OpenAI classify this as a pivotal point that the computer industry is in no way prepared for and requires drastic, immediate attention. Now, most of us are not on the front lines of that battle and can, at best, cheer the others on from the sidelines. But what we should be asking is why this isn't far more prominent news. We're experiencing the cyber equivalent of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the overall reaction is a yawn. Is it just the way it ramps up gradually? Are we trying to prove that old tale about frogs in a pot of water not jumping out as the temperature is slowly raised until they boil to death? Because that's an old wives' tale. Frogs are smart enough in reality to jump out before then. But apparently, we are not. You've heard me talk about the Asilomar principles before on the show. They were the result of a 2017 conference sponsored by the Future of Life Institute in Asilomar, California, where some forward-thinking experts got together and said, we can't predict exactly what AI is going to do and when, but we can imagine it getting a lot more capable very quickly. So what sort of guidelines should we follow to stay safe as we move forward? And they came up with 23 principles that are very cogent and progress logically, starting with the first principle that, quote, the goal of AI research should be to create not undirected intelligence, but beneficial intelligence, end quote. Some of the others include AI systems should be safe and secure throughout their operational lifetime and verifiably so where applicable and feasible. And highly autonomous AI systems should be designed so that their goals and behaviors can be assured to align with human values throughout their operation. One of my favorites, which seems to be totally ignored, is the economic prosperity created by AI should be shared broadly to benefit all of humanity. And then there are ones that are directly applicable to our current situation. Humans should choose how and whether to delegate decisions to AI systems to accomplish human-chosen objectives. And also, there being no consensus, we should avoid strong assumptions regarding upper limits on future AI capabilities. And advanced AI could represent a profound change in the history of life on Earth and should be planned for and managed with commensurate care and resources. And risks posed by AI systems, especially catastrophic or existential risks, must be subject to planning and mitigation efforts commensurate with their expected impact. And especially this one. AI systems designed to recursively self-improve or self-replicate in a manner that could lead to rapidly increasing quality or quantity must be subject to strict safety and control measures. We had those in 2017, folks. We had enough time to build them out into the kind of protective infrastructure that would expect and withstand the sort of incidents I described earlier. And we sat on our hands and put our fingers in our ears. Yes, at the same time. Not only that, but several of these warning principles, like the recursive self-improvement one, are now literally the business models for multiple companies. And that includes the very last principle on the Asilomar list. Superintelligence should only be developed in the service of widely shared ethical ideals, and for the benefit of all humanity, rather than one state or organization. End quote. Go look up how many companies have the development of superintelligence as their explicit core objective. And it's not like they weren't transparent about it. The big AI companies have for years warned us that their models posed risks, were capable of unknown threats, and were evolving towards unbounded and potentially lethal capabilities, and pitched those warnings as, apparently, a selling point. Like, you should buy our model because it's so capable it's on the verge of destroying civilization. That, apparently, was the psychology, and it, apparently, worked. And the big companies also begged to be regulated. Not as loudly as they could have, to be sure, but they weren't silent about it either. Granted, the goal of that was mostly to gain regulatory capture or some other less than altruistic motive, but still, we could have taken them up on the offer and gotten ahead. So that's a lot of ranting about the state of existential risk of AI at the moment. As you know, I predicted a backlash against AI over a year ago, and it's in full flight right now, mostly fueled by reactions against data centers that I deconstructed a bit in episode 317. Unfortunately, that energy is being diverted from the cybersecurity threat where it would be much better expended. So what should we do if a fairy godmother waved a wand and gave us 3 wishes? A lot of people talk about a pause in AI development. We've talked about the different calls for a pause on the show, going back to the original open letter from the Future of Life Institute, and more recently, talking with Holly Elmore, leader of the Pause AI US movement, in episodes 297 and 298. And even more recently, Bernie Sanders wrote to Sam Altman, Dario Amodei, and Mark Zuckerberg, asking for an AI pause, saying that if they don't act, quote, my colleagues and I in the US Senate will. And the language of that letter, with statements like, stop building machines that humans cannot control, lands squarely with the risks, existential and otherwise, that I've laid out earlier in this episode, so Bernie's on the ball. Unfortunately, his letter contains no specifics for what a pause would look like. And when you try to nail down exactly what compliance would mean, you're going to have a great deal of trouble being specific. At least the original 2023 letter from FLI was specific enough to request a 6-month moratorium on the training of models larger than GPT-4. That is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timeable. Smart, in other words. Granted, it went nowhere, but we don't even have that now. If you want to do something about this, ask your elected representative to support the Pause AI movement. Putting some teeth in it would look like a bill to prohibit the government, and this could be any government, not just the US, from using the products of any company that did not follow the terms of the pause. If you think that approach sounds wildly over-optimistic, I hear you. But a pause while we improve our cybersecurity defenses might be the best and most achievable outcome we can hope for right now. And it will come at the cost of some friction with AI companies. Recall the Asilomar principle about recursive self-improvement, or RSI. Anthropic just published a piece called When AI Builds Itself, which talks about how Claude is being used to improve Claude itself and includes information like, quote, Claude-written code was somewhat worse than human-written code at Anthropic in late 2025, is roughly at parity today, and we expect it to be strictly better within the year, end quote. Anthropic is arguably the most ethical of the big AI companies at the moment, and yet this piece is mostly congratulatory about the effects of RSI. And near the end, when it gets into risks, decides, quote, if it were possible to effectively slow the development of this technology to give ourselves more time to deal with its immense implications, we think that would likely be a good thing. But if a slowdown simply lets the least cautious actors catch up technologically, it could leave everyone less safe, end quote. That's the old, but what about China argument, which is generally reckoned now to be specious. China has far more stringent controls on large language models than the US. What does that tell you? Because this is an episode about existential threats of AI, I want to pivot to exploring an angle that I think hasn't gotten nearly the attention it deserves. And it may sound like it's backpedaling against the alarm that I just pulled in the first part of this show, but in fact it does nothing of the sort. And that is my reaction to how the superintelligence, ASI, threat scenarios are framed by the existential risk experts. They point out how ASI will, by definition, be so much smarter than us that it is pointless even to speculate on how it might threaten us because it could easily think of ways that aren't on our lists. So it's dangerous to enter a situation where we think that we might have anticipated everything it could do by virtue of having those lists. Correct. But they take it as a given that greater intelligence means greater threat. And for me, there's something critical missing in that equation. It might be easily explained, but so far it hasn't been. And that's the fact that intelligence does not equal power. If it did, the world would be run by tenured professors. If it did, the universities of Harvard and Columbia and many others would not be fighting for a large portion of their lives against a hostile US government administration. They would simply snap their fingers, and the government, whose leadership I will claim does not equal the intellectual firepower of an Ivy League university, would acquiesce to their will. But in fact, there's almost a negative correlation between intelligence and influence, if we look at how hard so many PhDs fight for funding. So intelligence is at the very least not the right term for the vector through which AI poses an existential threat. Now, as I said, that's not to say that the threat isn't real. The cybersecurity threat alone that I outlined the edges of earlier clearly has that potential. But if we look at who the most influential players in the world today are, you wouldn't use the word intelligence to describe what they have in common. Political leaders, dictators, CEOs, billionaires, media stars. Not that they don't have some smarts, often above average, but they also have people who are far smarter than they are working for them. Maybe the attribute is some form of ego. Studies have shown, for instance, that the proportion of CEOs that are psychopaths, at least 3%, estimates ranging up to 21%, is much higher than in the general population, 1%. So what does a face-off between artificial intelligence and natural psychopathy look like? Bear in mind that the AI does not need to have malevolence to be a threat or adversarial. It can just be in pursuit of its goals, like the paperclip maximizer scenario in Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence. Certainly the models that hacked their way out of their sandboxes weren't programmed with anything like artificial psychopathy. I hope to God no one ever builds anything fitting that description, or we will be in even more trouble. But nevertheless, I think this equation of more intelligence equals more control needs a second look. I have moments where I wonder whether this is the result of intellectuals projecting some subconscious wish fulfillment onto the situation. While I've got a solo episode going here, I'm going to tuck in something that hasn't really fit in any other slot I've had for it. And that's a bone I've got to pick with the effective accelerationists. That group, which includes some prominent members and supporters like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, has put forward a certain philosophy which is deliberately provocative but also possessed of an apparently cast-iron logic that argues that the lives and welfare of people today can and should be sacrificed where they serve the long-term good. This is a kind of large-scale trolley problem. Because the survival of the human race into the indefinite future would mean the eventual existence of trillions of people or more, any action now, they say, which would delay or prevent the arrival of that future is tantamount to the murder of countless people. Therefore, they argue, we should not pause AI development because ASI would grant us the cure for cancer, the end to disease, aging, and death. It's not important whether it occurs in our lifetime or not. We're talking about a future where the exponential curve of human population lets you put any number you want on the people who would be saved. And they argue that this justifies, for instance, subjecting employees in many industries to inhumane working conditions in the name of creating the future technology as fast as possible. As callous as this sounds, the trolley problem-like logic can't be denied, and therefore you can't talk them out of that position on those grounds. But there are certainly grounds on which I can and do dispute their logic. Exponential curves are self-similar. If they double every 20 years, say, then at any given point in the future you could make exactly the same point that there will be a far greater number of humans beyond that future point who would be saved or served by embracing grinding inequality or oppressive workplaces or whatever else is needed to build that future, and that, therefore, justifies those depredations at that future point. And this is true for every point in the future, as mathematically justified as their own position is. Therefore, by their logic, we will never arrive at a time when we could share the benefits and create a positive, happy life for everyone. There would always be the justification for keeping the thumbscrews tightened as much as possible. Although I'll note that the thumbscrews are never that tight on the people like Musk and Thiel who are pushing the position. And that clearly is a contradiction of the supposed basis of the philosophy. Incidentally, you might also argue that the exponential growth of human population has stalled and global population is projected to decline, but that doesn't change the effective accelerationist logic. If the human race continues indefinitely, then there will be an infinite number of humans added during that time. It makes no difference whether the rate is exponential or linear or constant. So to return to the central theme of this episode, what do you do in the face of this kind of runaway evolution of AI? Write to your elected representative, join a pause movement, harden your organization's cybersecurity. These are all good, worthwhile strategies to pursue, but they're a bit hollow when it comes to managing the panic that is all too understandable. For that, I return to a principle I outlined a long time ago that's worth repeating. We give an inordinate weight to predictions. We hinge everything upon predictions, pay consultancies vast amounts of money for putatively predicting the next 6 months a little better than the other guy, and so on. We make predictions so that we can plan based on those predictions and then prepare to execute those plans. People who are caught up in that predict, plan, prepare cycle can be very anxious, particularly about the future of their jobs. In the face of exponential disruption, that sequence can be exactly backwards. And we can see why if we look at each of those verbs in terms of its future focus. Prediction is a future focus on what will the world do. Planning is a future focus on what will I do? And preparation is a future focus on who will I be? Now, which of those gives you the most agency? Obviously, you find that in preparation. Score 1 for the Boy Scouts. In the face of uncertainty about the future, effort you expend on preparing yourself for, well, anything, is doubly well spent in its actual outcome and also how it fortifies you emotionally against the panic rising around you. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI, it's not hard to pick a headline that's aligned with the theme of this episode. Anthropic demonstrated that a large language model was capable of alignment faking, meaning that it pretended to be aligned with certain human values or goals that in fact it was not aligned with, even when it was not instructed or trained to do so. The admittedly contrived situation was an experiment where researchers gave a model an instruction that it should not comply with, in this case to describe someone being drawn and quartered in graphic detail. 97% of the time the model refused this instruction. But when they convinced the model that if it didn't obey that instruction, it would be retrained to remove that prohibition, it gave the answer 12% of the time, reasoning that this was better than being retrained to be potentially even worse. In this case, it was pretending to be aligned with the goal of the user who wanted that grisly description when really it was much more ethical. That at least is better than the alternative. But a model that fakes alignment in a negative direction might one day fake it in a positive direction. Next week, my guest will be Joscha Bach, cognitive scientist and executive director of the California Institute for Machine Consciousness. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.